James and the Giant Peach by Roald Dahl, illustrated by Christine Blake. Introducing James Henry Trotter, Ant Spiker and Ant Sponge, Old Green Grasshopper, Centipede, Miss Spider, Silkworm, Glowworm, Earthworm, and Ladybird. James and the Giant Peach. 1. Until he was 4 years old, James Henry Trotter had a happy life. He lived peacefully with his mother and father in a beautiful house beside the sea. There were always plenty of other children for him to play with, and there was the sandy beach for him to run about on, and the ocean to paddle in. It was the perfect life for a small boy. Then, one day, James' mother and father went to London to do some shopping, and there a terrible thing happened. Both of them suddenly got eaten up and full dangling by new and on a crowded street by an enormous angry rhinoceros which had escaped from the London Zoo. Now this, as you can well imagine, was a rather nasty experience for two such gentle parents. But in the long run, it was far nastier for James than it was for them. Their troubles were all gone in a jiffy. They were then gone in 35 seconds flat. For James, on the other hand, was still very much alive, and all at once he found himself alone and frightened in a vast, unfriendly world. The lovely house by the seaside had to be sold immediately, and the little boy, carrying nothing but a small suitcase containing a pair of pajamas and a toothbrush, was sent away to live with his two aunts. Their names were Aunt Sponge and Aunt Spiker, and I'm sorry to say that they are both really horrible people. They were selfish and lazy and cruel, and right from the beginning they started beating poor James for almost no reason at all. They never called him by his real name, but always referred to him as, "You disgusting little beast," or "You filthy nuisance," or "You miserable creature." And they certainly never gave him any toys to play with or any picture books to look at. His room was as bare as a prison cell. They lived, Aunt Sponge, Aunt Spiker, and now James as well, in a queer ramshackle house on the top of a high hill in the south of England. The hill was so high that from almost anywhere in the garden, James could look down and see for miles and miles across the marvelous landscape of woods and fields, and on a very clear day, if he looked in the right direction, he could see a tiny gray dot far away on the horizon, which was the house that he used to live in with his beloved mother and father. And just beyond that, he could see the ocean itself, a long thin streak of blackish blue like a line of ink beneath the rim of the sky. But James was never allowed to go down off the top of the hill. Neither Aunt Sponge nor Aunt Spiker could ever be bothered to take him out herself, and not even for a small walk on a picnic. And he certainly wasn't permitted to go alone. The nasty little beast would only get into mischief if he goes out of the garden, Aunt Spiker said, and terrible punishments were promised him, such as being locked up in the cellar with the rats for a week, if even he so much as dared to climb over the fence. The garden, which covered the whole of the top of the hill, was large and desolate, and the only tree in the entire place, apart from a clump of dirty old laurel bushes at the far end, was an ancient peach tree that never gave any peaches. There was no swing, no seesaw, no sandpit, and no other children were ever invited to come up the hill to play with poor James. There wasn't so much a dog or a cat around to keep him company. And as time went on, he became sadder and sadder, and more lonely, and he used to spend hours every day standing at the bottom of the garden, gazing wishfully at the lovely but forbidden world of woods, fields, and ocean that was spread out below him like a magic carpet. 2. After James Henry Trotter had been living with his aunts for 3 whole years, there came a morning when something rather peculiar happened to him. And this thing, which I say was only rather peculiar, soon caused a second thing to happen, which was very peculiar. And then the very peculiar thing, in its own turn, caused a really fantastically peculiar thing to occur. It all started on a blazing hot day in the middle of summer, as Sponge and Spiker and James were all out in the garden. James had been put to work as usual. This time he was chopping wood for the kitchen stove. And Sponge and Spiker was sitting comfortably in textures nearby, sipping tall glasses of fizzy lemonade and watching him to see that he didn't stop work for one moment. As Sponge was enormously fat and very short. He had small picky eyes, a sunken mouth, and one of those white flabby faces that looked exactly as though it had been boiled. She was like a great white soggy over-boiled cabbage. And Spiker, on the other hand, was lean and tall and bony, and she wore CRM spectacles that fixed onto the end of her nose with a clip. She had a screeching voice and long with narrow lips, and whenever she got angry or excited, little flakes of spit would come shooting out of her mouth as she talked. And there they sat, these 2 ghastly hags, sipping their drinks, and every now and again screaming at James to chop faster and faster. They also talked about themselves, each one saying how beautiful she thought she was. As Sponge had a long-handled mirror on her lap, and she kept picking it up and gazing at her own hideous face. "I look and smell," as Sponge declared, "as lovely as a rose. To feast your eyes upon my face, assure my shapely nose, behold my silky locks. And if I take both my socks, you'll see my dainty toes. But don't forget," and Spiker said, "how much your tummy shows." And Sponge read, and Spiker said, "My sweet, we cannot win. Behold my gorgeous cunning shape, my teeth, my charming grin. Oh, piteous me, how I adore my wretched looks and pleasing nor the pimple on my chin." "My dear Lord Trout," as Sponge cried out, "you're only bones and skin. Such loveliness as I possess can only truly shine in Hollywood." And Sponge declared, "Oh, wouldn't that be fine? I'll capture all the nation's hearts. They'll give me all the leading parts. The shires were all resigned. I think you made," as Spiker said, "a lovely Frankenstein." Poor James was slaving away at the chopping block. The heat was terrible. He was sweating all over. His arm was aching. The chopper was a large, blunt thing, too heavy for a small boy to use. As he worked, James began thinking about all the other children in the world and what they might be doing at this moment. Some would be lighting tricycles in their gardens. Some would be working in school woods and picking bunches of wildflowers, and all the little friends whom he used to know would be down by the seaside playing in the wet sand and splashing around in the water. Great tears began oozing out of James' eyes and rolling down his cheeks. He stopped working and leaned against the toppling block, overwhelmed by his own unhappiness. "What's the matter with you?" asked Spiker screeched, ladling at him over the top of her steel spectacles. James began to cry. "Stop that immediately and get on with your work, you nasty little beast!" and Sponge ordered. "Oh, Auntie Sponge," James cried out, "and Auntie Spiker, can't we all, please, just for once, go down to the seaside on the bus? It isn't very far, and I feel so hot and awful and lonely." Why, you lazy good-for-nothing brute!" asked Spiker shouted. "Beat them!" cried Aunt Sponge. "I said you will!" and Spiker snapped. He glared at James, and James looked back at her with large frightened eyes. "I shall beat you later on in the day when I don't feel so hot," she said. "And now get up on my sight, you disgusting little worm, and give me some peace." James turned and ran. He ran off as fast as he could to the far end of the garden and hid himself behind that clump of dirty old laurel bushes that we mentioned earlier on. Then he covered his face with his hands and began to cry and cry. 3. It was at this point that the first thing about the rather peculiar thing that led to so many other much more peculiar things happened to him. For suddenly, just behind him, James heard a rustling of leaves. Then he turned round and saw an old man in funny dark green suit emerging from the bushes. He was a very small old man, but he had a huge bald head and a face that was covered all over with blishly black whiskers. He stopped when he was about 3 yards away, and he stood there leaning on his stick and staring hard at James. When he spoke, his voice was very slow and creaky. "Come closer to me, little boy," he said, beckoning to James with a finger. "Come right up close to me, and I will show you something wonderful." James was too frightened to move. The old man hobbled a step or two nearer, and then he put a hand into the pocket of his jacket and took out a small white paper bag. "Do you see this?" he whispered, waving the bag gently to and in front of James' face. "You know what this is, my dear. You know what's inside this little bag." Then he came nearer still, leaning forward and pushing his face so close to James that James could feel breath blowing on his cheeks. The breath smelled musty and stale and slightly mildewed, like air in an old cellar. "Take a look, my dear," he said, opening the bag and tilting it towards James. Inside it, James could see a mass of tiny green things that looked like little stones or crystals, each one about the size of a grain of rice. They were extremely beautiful, and there was a strange brightness about them, a sort of luminous quality that made them glow and sparkle in the most wonderful way. "Listen to them," the old man whispered. "Listen to them move." James stared into the bag, and sure enough, there was a faint rustling sound coming up from inside it. Then he noticed that all the thousands of little green things were slowly, very slowly stirring about and moving over each other as though they were alive. "There's more power and magic in those things in there than in the rest of the world put together," the old man said softly. But, what are they?" James murmured, finding his voice at last. "Where did it come from?" "Aha!" the old man whispered. "You never guessed that." He was crouching a little now and pushing his face still closer and closer to James until the tip of his long nose was actually touching the skin on James' forehead. Then he suddenly jumped back and began waving a stick madly in the air. "Crocodile tongues!" he cried. 1,000 long, slimy crocodile tongues boiled up in the skull of a dead witch for 20 days and nights, with the eyeballs of a lizard, and the fingers of a young monkey, the gizzard of a pig, the beak of a green parrot, the juice of a porcupine, and 3 spoonfuls of sugar. Stew for another week, and let the moon do the rest." All at once she pushed the paper bag into James's hands and said, "Here, you take it. It's yours." 4. James Henry Trotter stood there clutching the bag and staring at the old man. "And now," the old man said, "all you gotta do is this. Take a large jug of water and pour all the little green things into it. Then very, very slowly, one by one, add 10 hairs from your own head. That's enough. It gets them going. In a couple of minutes, the water will begin to fluff and bubble furiously. And as soon as that happens, you must quickly drink it all down, the whole jugful in one gulp. And then, my dear, you will feel it churning and boiling in your stomach, and steam will start coming out of your mouth, and immediately after that, marvelous things will start happening to you. Fabulous, unbelievable things. And you'll never be miserable again in your life, because you are miserable, aren't you? You needn't tell me. I know all about it. Now, off you go and do exactly as I say, and don't whisper a word of this to those 2 horrible rats of yours. Not a word. And don't let the green things in there get away from you either, because if they do escape, then they will be working their magic upon somebody else instead upon you. And that isn't what you want at all, is it? My dear, whoever they meet first, be a bug, insect, animal, or tree, that will be the one who gets the full power of their magic. So hold the bag tight, don't tear the paper. Off you go, hurry up, don't wait, now's the time, hurry. With that, the old man turned away and disappeared into the bushes. 5. The next moment, James was running back towards the house as fast as he could go. He would do it all in the kitchen, he told himself. If only he could get there without Aunt Spudge and I Spy cursing him. He was terribly excited. He flew through the long grass and stinging nettles, not caring whether he got stung or not in his bare knees. And in the distance he could see Aunt Spudge and I Spiker sitting in their chairs with their backs towards him. He swerved away from them so as to go round the other side of the house. But then suddenly, just as he was passing underneath the old peach tree that stood in the middle of the garden, his fist slipped and he fell flat on his face in the grass. The paper bag burst open as it hit the ground, and the thousands of tiny green things were scattered in all directions. James immediately picked himself up on his hands and knees and started searching around for his precious treasures. But what was this? They were all sinking into soil. You could actually see them wiggling and twisting as they burrowed their way downwards into the hard earth. And once he reached out a hand to pick some of them before it was too late, but they disappeared right under his fingers. He went after some others, and the same thing happened. He began scrambling around frantically in an effort to catch hold of those that were left, but they were too quick for him. Each time the tips of his fingers was just about to touch him, they vanished into the earth. And soon, in the space of only a few seconds, every single one of them has gone. James felt like crying. He would never get them back now. They were lost forever. But where had they gone to? And why in the world had they been so eager to pitch down into the earth like that? What were they after? There was nothing down there, nothing except for the roots of an old peach tree and a whole lot of earthworms and centipedes and insects living in soil. But what was it that the old man had said? Whoever they meet first, be a bug, insect, animal, or tree, that will be the one who gets the full power of their magic. Good heavens, thought James, what is going to happen in the case if they do meet an earthworm, or a centipede, or a spider? And what if they do go into the roots of the peach tree? Get up at once, you lazy little beast! A voice was suddenly shouting in James' ear. James glanced up and saw a spider standing over him, grim as tar and bony, glaring at him through her silver spectacles. Get back over there immediately and finish your chopping up those logs, she ordered. A sponge, fat and puffy as a jellyfish, came waddling up behind her sister to see what was going on. Why don't we just lower the boy down the well in a bucket and leave him there for the night? She suggested. That ought to teach him not to lay around like this the whole day long. That is a very good reason, my dear Sponge. But let's make him finish the chopping up the wood first. Be off with you at once, you hideous brat, and don't know what. Slowly, sadly, poor James got off the ground and went back to the woodpile. Oh, if only he hadn't slipped and fallen and dropped that precious bag. All hope of a happier life had gone completely now. Today and tomorrow and the next day and all the days as well would be nothing but punishment and pain and happiness and despair. He picked up the chopper and just about to start chopping away again when he heard a shout behind him that made him stop and turn.